Okay, so this video is going to be going over your lesson plans. So this week you have a few things that are due on your lesson plans, but not the entire lesson plan. So we're kind of taking the lesson plan in different chunks. That being said, you still have to submit 3 lesson plans. And so your lesson plans and all the instructions for your lesson plans are going to be located online. And so everything for your portfolio is over here in this portfolio tab. So not in your portfolio instructions will you find the lesson plan project instructions, but here, lesson plan project instructions is where you'll go to find specific details on your lesson plan. Right underneath there is a link for the lesson plan template so that you can type directly into that template for each one of your lessons. So with the project instructions, there are 3 different lesson plans that are due: a reading lesson plan, a math lesson plan, and one more of your choosing. That could be history, art, physical education, science. It could be another reading, another math. Any one of those is fine. The instructions are also going to be important because they're going to detail out what type of learner you're going to be accommodating for in each type of lesson. So in the reading lesson, there's a specific type of learning disability you will be accommodating for in the math one, and then in the third one as well. So make sure you spend some time reviewing the lesson plan instructions inside of this link. Also in there will be a rubric, and that's going to be important to you as well to follow that rubric. Now to go over a few things, so here inside the instructions are the things that you're going to be submitting for each lesson plan. So you're going to have a rationale, learning objective, TEKS, the process, materials, and Bloom's taxonomy for each lesson. So for your reading, your math, and your third lesson, you're going to have all of those things. So not everything is going to be filled out, but those are the things that are going to be filled out. In that portfolio tab, I've provided some resources for you. So here's a rationale example on how to build a rationale, how to build learning objectives, and I'll be going over specifically that today so you know how to build those learning objectives. But your rationale and your learning objectives are 2 very different things. With your rationale, it's kind of the overview, the broad look at what the purpose of the lesson is. Is the purpose for them to appreciate art? Is it to apply math strategies to real-world applications? Is it to be able to tell a story from beginning, middle, and end? So the rationale really talks about the purpose of the lesson, the overall big overarching kinds of things for your lesson plan. The learning objectives are much more specific. Those learning objectives need to be in a certain format and contain certain things. So I'm going to flip over here to my whiteboard. And so your learning objectives need to be or contain your ABCs. So your A is your audience. Who is your audience? For you, your audience are your students. Your B, what's your B? B is the behavior. And so what is that behavior? That's going to be your Bloom's verb. And so I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. And C, what's C? C is the condition or the criteria. And the condition is like the activity that the students will be doing. And so what does that look like total? It means your sentence is going to be something like, the student will be able to, that's your audience, add, or let's say count, numbers 0 to 20 would be the behavior. Your condition would be the activity, using the Bear Manipulative Guide or using the worksheet provided. So your audience is your students, the behavior is the thing that they're doing based on Bloom's, and the condition is the activity in which they're doing it. So a word about your Bloom's taxonomy verbs and what you're going to use when. So I'm going to do a new share here again. Let's see here. There's my Bloom's verbs. So Bloom's, if you recall, there's 6 levels of Bloom's. Remember is the lowest level of Bloom's, and creating is the highest level of Bloom's. So the most complex learning out there. So remember is just the very, very basic level. So they're recalling facts, details, creating timelines, things like that. Understanding is basic comprehension. Applying, the key here is it's applying to a new situation. So taking, let's say, a math concept and applying it to economics, or taking a math concept and applying it to giving and receiving change. Analyzing is breaking information into parts, and evaluating is putting those parts back together. And then creation is putting stuff together so that it creates a new pattern or a new element. Now here's a word about your verbs that you're going to be using inside of your rationale and inside your learning objectives. So inside the rationale, you might use things that are what I call fuzzy verbs. They're not measurable necessarily. So you might say things like, the purpose of the lesson is for students to appreciate art. Appreciation is not something that you can measure. You also can't measure comprehension. You can't measure whether or not students understand something. You can't really measure if they assume something under this analysis part here. So those kinds of verbs are those more kind of overarching purpose verbs that you're going to use in your rationale, but they're not verbs that you should be using in your learning objectives. Your learning objective verbs should be measurable and specific. And so what do those look like? It means that you should actually be able to see the student doing it, directly observable. You cannot directly observe understanding. You cannot go into a child's head and see if they understand something. What you can do is see if they answered correctly. You know, for example, did they add the numbers correctly? Did they identify the main idea? Did they recall the timeline of the main events of the Civil War? So that's how you can measure understanding without saying the student will be able to understand. So what I'm looking for when you're writing your learning objectives is that they have to include your audience, the behavior, and the condition. And specifically, that behavior has to have one of these Bloom's taxonomy verbs that's measurable, meaning I can directly observe it. So that's what I'm looking for in your learning objective. You only have to provide one learning objective for each one of your lesson plans. So one reading objective, one math objective, one science or social studies objective. Now, lots of people ask, well, where do you get those objectives from? Well, as a classroom teacher, you always have to start with the TEKS. The TEKS are the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And that's the type of curriculum that guides the behaviors or the classroom teaching. So it's a guide that tells teachers what to teach, when to teach it. And so you're going to find that on the TEA website. So let's go there. So www.tea.state.tx.us is the Texas Education Agency website. Located on this website is the curriculum and instructional materials. So you see I hover over here, and here's the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. They're organized by topics, but they're also organized a little bit lower by grade level if you're doing elementary. So let's click on, let's say, 3rd grade. And that's going to pull up my TEKS. So these are my TEKS. In order for us to pick a learning objective, we first have to pick a TEK. So what knowledge or skills do you want the students to be able to learn that day? My suggestion to you is that you do something with a little bit more meat. Because a lesson needs to include about an hour's worth of teaching material, like identifying and reading contractions probably will not take an hour. So you might want to do something that's a little bit more meaty. That might take a little bit more time. So here's a learning objective, the reading of vocabulary. So you're going to pull out a specific one. So rather than pick out students understand new vocabulary and use it when reading, you're going to pick one of the ABCDs underneath that. So identify and use synonyms, antonyms, homographs, and homophones. So first choose your TEK. Then based on your TEK, then you can build your rationale and build your learning objective. So the first step is picking that TEK. Second step is building your rationale. Third step is building your learning objective. Once you've done those 3 things, then the verbs inside of each one of those items, your TEK, your rationale, your learning objective, all of those should line up and kind of fall under one category of Bloom's. So what does that mean? That means you don't want to have your rationale at analyze and your learning objective down here at remember. So you want all of those things to align. If your learning objective is down at remember, then your rationale should be down at remember. Your TEK should also be remember. So all of those 3 items should align when it comes to the type of thinking skill. Because you don't want to, let's say, test on something that's lower than you should or higher than you should. So one of the things that you want to make sure of is that all three of those blooms line up. And you can do that by ensuring that your verb that you use inside the rationale and inside your learning objective matches or coincides with the verb that's used here inside the teak, since that's the first place that you're starting anyway. And once you've decided that, then you actually have that next step of blooms where you're just going to show whatever level of Bloom's taxonomy that there is. So that goes over a little bit of rationale, learning objectives, and teaks, and Bloom's taxonomy. Materials are very, very easy if you're just telling me what materials that you as a teacher and the student are going to use. The process is the actual step-by-step. What are you going to do as a teacher? That needs to be specific enough where if I came in as your substitute teacher, I would be able to follow that plan. So it does need to be pretty specific. Again, I've provided some examples here for you. I've done a variety of elementary and then high school lesson plan as well. Those are there for your reference, just to see, again, what I'm looking for, the level of detail, how to write out what a teak looks like, a rationale, learning objective, things of that nature. But of course, if you have some questions, email me or visit my office hours, and I'll be happy to clarify.